When a man chooses to fast, he believes he is simply denying himself food, but in truth, something far greater stirs beyond what the eyes can see. Heaven is not indifferent to the trembling discipline of a hungry soul. Angels bend low to watch. The silence of the body becomes a language that speaks louder than any prayer uttered by lips. Fasting is the soul's declaration that it longs for heaven more than for earth. When a person chooses to set aside the basic necessity of food, it is not merely an act of discipline, but an act of profound allegiance. The body cries out for what it has always known, but the soul whispers that there is something far greater, something eternal, something that bread alone cannot satisfy. In fasting, the soul stands before heaven and says, "I belong to you more than to this world. My hunger is not only for what fills the stomach, but for what fills eternity." It is a holy rebellion against the illusion that earthly things are ultimate. Every skipped meal becomes a testimony that there is a feast beyond the table, a feast that is eternal and incorruptible. To fast is to live in contradiction to the rhythm of the world. The world feeds on constant consumption, always seeking to fill itself with more, never satisfied, always restless. Yet the soul in fasting dares to say, "I can be emptied, and still I live. I can lack what the world calls essential, and yet my heart still beats with hope." This contradiction is powerful because it reveals the truth that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. The emptiness of the stomach becomes a mirror to the emptiness of the world, and in that reflection, the soul sees that its true home cannot be built on dust. Hunger is a language, and fasting teaches us how to hear it rightly. Normally, hunger shouts about the body's need, but in fasting, hunger is transformed into a messenger of heaven. Every pang becomes a reminder that there is a deeper craving beneath all cravings, the longing for God Himself. When the stomach growls, the soul learns to pray. When weakness comes, the spirit learns to rest in divine strength. Fasting reshapes desire. It takes what is natural and redirects it toward what is eternal. This is why saints, prophets, and seekers through the ages turned to fasting not to impress heaven, but to prepare themselves to receive what heaven was always offering. The act of fasting, therefore, is not meant to manipulate God, as though withholding food could bend His will. Rather, it is the soul bending itself into alignment with God's will. It is an inner reordering, a shift of priorities where heaven is placed above earth, spirit above flesh, eternity above the moment. The weakness of the body becomes the strength of the soul, for in fasting a person discovers that faith is not theory but reality. The unseen becomes more tangible than the seen, and heaven draws nearer, not because it has moved, but because the soul has cleared away the noise that once obscured it. Every true fast carries with it a declaration of love. It is the lover saying to the beloved, "I want you more than I want comfort. I hunger for you more than I hunger for bread." This kind of devotion does not pass unnoticed. In heaven, such longing is treasured, for it reflects the very nature of faith. Faith is always a reaching out for what cannot be grasped by sight, and fasting embodies that reach. It is faith made visible in weakness, love expressed in silence, longing displayed in emptiness. And though fasting often feels like loss, in truth it is gain, for the soul that longs for heaven more than for earth will one day discover that heaven was longing for it all along. In denying the body, the spirit awakens to a richer feast unseen by human eyes. To fast is not to starve, but to discover a banquet that lies beyond the senses. The body, which so often rules the hours of our day, is silenced, and in its silence the spirit begins to speak more clearly. We are not merely flesh, though the world would have us believe so. We are eternal souls clothed in flesh, and when the body is hushed, the soul has space to breathe. The denial of food may seem like emptiness, But it is in this very emptiness that the spirit finds room to be filled with what the world cannot provide. The table of heaven does not serve bread and water, yet it nourishes more deeply than any earthly meal. It is laid with peace, strength, clarity, and the sweetness of God's presence. When one chooses to fast, the body complains and groans, but the spirit listens for another voice, a voice that has always been speaking yet often drowned out by the noise of appetite. In that stillness, truth becomes sharper, prayer becomes more alive, and one begins to sense that what is unseen is in fact more real than what can be touched or tasted. Fasting shifts the seat of hunger from the stomach to the soul, and in that shift, the feast of heaven begins. The body, with all its cravings, is not evil, but it is demanding. It calls for attention, insisting on satisfaction, pulling the soul constantly toward the temporal. But when the body is gently denied, even for a time, its voice softens. Then another hunger rises, one that cannot be satisfied by bread or fruit or wine. It is the hunger for God, the yearning for meaning, the thirst for eternal life, and it is precisely here, in this denial, that the soul begins to awaken. The spirit, long overshadowed by the noise of bodily demands, stretches itself like a man rising after sleep. It tastes the first sweetness of freedom, realizing that its deepest desires lie not in the earth, but in heaven. The richer feast of the spirit is one of revelation. The mind becomes clearer, the heart becomes more tender, and prayers, once heavy, ascend with greater ease. What once seemed impossible in moments of distraction becomes possible when the soul is hungry for God. Fasting tunes the soul to the frequency of heaven. Just as a musician adjusts the strings of an instrument to produce harmony, fasting tightens and tunes the soul until it resonates with God's will. The body's temporary emptiness becomes the soul's eternal melody. What is unseen cannot be grasped by the hands or tasted by the tongue, yet it satisfies more deeply than any feast laid on an earthly table. Joy flows not from what is consumed, but from what is revealed. Strength comes not from calories, but from communion. A man may fast and feel physically weaker, yet at the same time find within himself a resilience and peace he cannot explain. This is the paradox of fasting. What is denied outwardly becomes multiplied inwardly. The soul grows strong even as the body grows light. The unseen feast is not about what enters the stomach, but about what fills the heart. To awaken to such a feast is to discover that heaven is not distant. It is nearer than breath, waiting to nourish those who choose to turn aside from temporary pleasures and seek the eternal. In the denial of the body, the spirit learns that it was made for something far more enduring. And when the fast is over, when food returns to the table, the soul carries with it a memory of the richer feast, a reminder that the greatest nourishment is not found in what is eaten but in the presence of God Himself. Every hunger pang becomes a prayer, rising like incense before the throne of God. In fasting, the ache of emptiness is not wasted, for even the simplest growl of the stomach is transformed into a wordless cry that heaven understands. Normally, hunger is only a signal of the body, a reminder that it needs food, but in the sacred act of fasting, hunger is given a new meaning. It becomes a messenger, carrying with it the soul's longing for God. Every pang is like a bell tolling in the silence, reminding both the one who fasts and the Lord who listens that the heart desires more than bread, more than satisfaction. It desires the eternal presence of the Creator. When a man or woman fasts, they discover that the body cannot be ignored. It demands attention through its protests and weakness. Yet, instead of resisting this, fasting redirects the very complaint of the flesh into a prayer of the spirit. The hunger, once only a burden, becomes an offering. It says to God, "Here is my weakness, here is my dependence, here is my longing." Each pang becomes like incense smoke, rising upward delicate, unseen, and yet filling the courts of heaven with its fragrance. God delights in such prayers, not because he requires the suffering of his children, but because each pang testifies to love, to devotion, and to a willingness to seek him above all else. There is a hidden intimacy in this exchange. While words may sometimes falter in prayer, hunger never lies. It speaks of sincerity in a way that speech cannot. To endure the discomfort of fasting is to let every bodily reminder become a spiritual cry. And unlike words which can be hollow, hunger is honest. It cannot be faked. It tells the truth of sacrifice, and when lifted to God, it becomes an act of worship. The person fasting may feel small, weak, or distracted by the pull of appetite, but in the eyes of heaven, each pang is a jewel, a shining prayer lifted from earth to the throne of grace. This is why fasting has always been tied so closely to intercession and repentance. The groaning of the body, turned heavenward, becomes more powerful than eloquent speeches. A man on his knees in hunger speaks with greater weight than 1,000 empty words. Every pang says, "Lord, I depend on you. Lord, I seek you. Lord, I need you more than this bread." These are prayers that move not because they impress, but because they are true. In their simplicity, they reach directly to the heart of God. And what is God's response? He does not despise such prayers, but treasures them. The Scriptures often describe the prayers of the saints as incense in golden bowls before his throne. Hunger, when consecrated in fasting, joins this incense. It becomes part of the eternal fragrance of devotion that fills heaven. Angels themselves bear witness to it, and the God who sees in secret rewards openly, not always with immediate answers, not always with visible signs, but with something greater, his nearness, his strength, his peace poured into the soul. Thus, the fasting soul learns to listen differently. When the stomach aches, it does not curse the pain but turns it into praise. When weakness comes, it does not despair but whispers a prayer. In this way, an ordinary pang is baptized into something holy. What was once a complaint of the body is transformed into a song of the spirit. This is the mystery of fasting, that even the smallest ache can become an act of worship. In the end, fasting teaches us that nothing is wasted when offered to God, not even hunger, especially not hunger. Every pang, every moment of emptiness, every whisper of the body's need becomes a prayer rising unseen, joining the eternal incense of the saints, and filling the throne room of God with the fragrance of a heart that longs for him above all else. Heaven does not change when you fast, you do, and in that change you draw nearer to heaven. God does not become more generous because you have denied yourself, nor does he withhold his presence until you suffer. His nature is unchanging, constant in love, perfect in goodness, unshaken in mercy. When you fast, it is not God who is altered, but you who are softened, awakened, and made more receptive to what has always been offered. The act of fasting strips away the noise that clutters the heart and allows you to hear more clearly the song that has never ceased, the song of heaven calling you home. We often imagine that fasting somehow persuades heaven to act, as though God waits for our sacrifice before he moves in kindness. But, in truth, fasting prepares us to see what has always been true. It clears the fog, lifts the veil, and sharpens our vision. Heaven was always near. God's love was always present. Yet the distractions of the body and the noise of the world clouded that reality. Fasting does not make heaven bend down. It makes the soul stand taller, rising above the haze of appetite and desire, so that heaven comes into view. The change that takes place is subtle yet profound. The heart, weighed down by indulgence, grows light in fasting. The mind, dulled by constant satisfaction, grows sharp when the body is denied. The will, once weakened by endless yielding to appetite, finds strength in resistance. And in all these transformations, the soul begins to sense the reality of heaven more vividly. It is not that heaven moved closer, but that you cleared the path within yourself to step nearer to it. The door was never locked. Fasting is simply the hand that pushes it open. To fast is to learn humility. You realize how dependent you are, how fragile, how quickly the body protests when denied what it craves. Yet in that weakness lies the beginning of true strength, for humility softens the soul, making it more pliable in the hands of God. Pride feeds on indulgence, but humility grows in emptiness. When the body is humbled, the spirit rises. And in this rising, you begin to touch the eternal. The nearer you draw to heaven, the more you realize that your strength was never your own. Fasting reveals that you were never self-sufficient. You were always sustained by grace. This change also awakens gratitude. When you fast and feel hunger, the return of food is no longer ordinary. It is a gift. What was once taken for granted becomes precious. Every bite is a reminder of God's provision. The heart learns to thank Him not only for bread but for breath, not only for nourishment but for the unseen mercies that sustain life. Gratitude makes the soul lighter, lifting it closer to heaven, for the thankful heart is always nearer to God than the ungrateful one. And beyond gratitude, fasting awakens love. For as you draw nearer to heaven, you sense more deeply the love that has always been reaching for you. God does not love you more because you fast, but you perceive His love more clearly because fasting has quieted the distractions that once muffled it. The change is within you, not in Him, and in that change you discover that fasting is not about earning His presence, but about awakening to it. Heaven remains steady, but you are drawn into its orbit by the shifts that fasting creates within your soul. In the end, fasting is less about altering the world outside, and more about transforming the world within. Heaven remains constant, radiant, unchanging, but when you fast you change. You become lighter, more focused, more awake. And in that change, you draw nearer not because heaven has moved, but because at last you have turned your face toward it.